Okay, our speaker tonight, Louis Katz, has a long, long bio. So I would direct you to his website, louiskatzphotography.com. But he is a member of the Baltimore Camera Club. He says it's an integral part of his photography life. He's received many awards from the competitions at the club. He also teaches photography at Johns Hopkins Odyssey program and the Capitol Photography Center of DC, and he also teaches private students. He loves getting those aha moments that only teaching can provide. His favorite Ansel Adams quote is, "A great photograph is one that truly expresses what one feels in the deepest sense about what is being photographed." So with a warm welcome, Louis Katz.
Oh, thank you very, very much for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invite to speak to your group. I'm in really great company in terms of the list of people that I heard you mention that are speaking. To be coming right before Cole Thompson and speaking about black and white has me just a little nervous, but that's okay. I'll get over that. Cole Thompson is definitely one of my black and white heroes as well, and he definitely gives great presentations. But I recognized a lot of the other names that were mentioned too, so I think you're up for a really good year. Just to fill in a little more bio stuff, there's my cat on my desk. Oh, get off, Nico. I grew up in New York City. I was lucky enough to go to a high school in Manhattan that offered photography as an elective. And so I took photography courses when I was like 15 years old, and had a dark room in my basement, and that's how I sort of got started. My dad was the photographer of our family. He was always the one that had the camera out he always took slides for our vacations. And then after high school, I kind of let photography slip for a while. I didn't do much with it in college. And through a very circuitous route, I ended up living about 40 miles north of Baltimore for a job. And I had never lived in a very rural area before, but this was a very rural part of what's called Southern York County, Pennsylvania. And that's what got me to pick my camera up again, was the barns, the fence lines, the landscape, because I had really never lived in a rural area before. Now, at that point, I had already established my career in the travel business. That's what I made my living doing for over 40 years. So at that point, if you would have asked me, I would have said that I was a full color slide travel nature landscape photographer. Black and white kind of got lost. I did all black and white when I was in high school, but that was really about it. It wasn't until I got involved with the Baltimore Camera Club that I got reintroduced to black and white and reintroduced to photographers that took black and white extraordinarily seriously. And it was then that I began to listen to all the speakers that came through our club, just like you guys. And one of the things that I always used to hear was that if you remove color from an image, you're removing a distraction. And by removing that distraction, you're basically left with just the bones of the image, the actual composition, the shapes, the textures, the lines. And that is absolutely all true. So I'm not going to speak against that. So for years, I sort of became both, meaning that if color was an intrinsic part of an image, I left it as a color file. And if it wasn't, I then converted it to black and white. But I started to dig more deeply into why I had this very strong attraction to black and white, even above color in most instances. And so with that, I'm going to now just dive into this program. And I think you all now should see my Lightroom screen. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, no, we see from capture to print.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's my Lightroom screen.
Okay.
the whole program is being done from Lightroom.
Okay.
So yeah, the formal name of the program is From Capture to Print, The Art of Black and White Photography. It sometimes runs a little long. It kind of depends on how many good questions we get. So we may not get to the print part of the program, which is usually like the last 8 or 10 minutes. And especially with so many clubs not doing print at the moment, because ours isn't doing it either because of COVID. So that we may not get to that part, but maybe we will. There's my web site. It's just lewiskatzphotography.com, which just happened to be available years ago when I went out to buy the domain. And my email address is olympus21209@yahoo.com, which is a combination of the camera brand that I've been loyal to for over 40 years, although I now shoot Nikon as well, but don't tell anyone at Olympus that. But I picked up my first Olympus when I was about 14. So that's a good 44 years ago, about 54 years ago. So it's a combination of Olympus, my zip code, and yahoo.com. So now we're just going to dive into the program. And sometimes what it jams right at the front end. Okay, and Roberta mentioned this quote, a great photograph is one that truly expresses what one feels in the deepest sense about what is being photographed, Ansel Adams. Ansel had a lot of great quotes. He also had a lot of great photographs. The reason why this quote is so meaningful to me is you're going to hear me talk more about emotions and feelings and connectivity to your work tonight than you're going to hear me talking about apertures or shutter speeds. There's absolutely a technical aspect to photography that one needs to get past and actually get really fine at. But to me, that's not what photography is really all about. What photography is all about to me is the ability to use visual imagery and convey very strong emotions, and in particular, black and white. And that's what I realized was the big attraction to me about black and white photography. It was that emotional connection that I was able to make both with my own images and certainly with images that other people were creating that were black and white images. So why not start with an Ansel Adams? We're going to first start by just looking at some photographers that have influenced me in my search for black and white. Ansel Adams did not include many people or animals in his photographs, and yet you somehow still feel his connection to the environment. And of course, he was a very ardent environmentalist, which definitely adds to that as well. And when you're looking at one of the iconic Ansel images like this one, and not every image that Ansel or any photographer takes is iconic, no matter how good they are. But in the really good ones with Ansel, I really feel his personal connection to the landscape. And I find that to be an amazing power to be able to have. And I'll be talking more about how I accomplish similar goals through other means. But I think with Ansel, one of the attractions is that visceral feeling that you get when you view one of his really famous and well known and well put together images. So as I said, we're going to first just quickly look at some other people's images that had an impact on me before we jump into my own work. This person's work was totally undiscovered until recently. Unfortunately, until she passed away. This is an image by Vivian Mayer, who actually was a nanny by trade, but was a photographer. But she had never shown any of her work to anybody. And she had a very small family, so it wasn't that she shared work with even her friends and family. So her work wasn't really discovered until it was auctioned off at 2 separate auctions, and 2 separate gentlemen bought her work. And now, of course, there are lots of books out on Vivian Mayer. What Vivian does in this photo is what makes, to me, a great black and white photo, because what she's done is she's combined a beautiful graphic context, which is, in this image, to me, the graphic nature is the wall, the vanishing line wall going off to the on the right hand side, the repetitive benches on the left, the branches that are being silhouetted in the puddle. But again, for me, when you add, in this case, people, and I believe that this may have been a family that she was working for, so I think this is a dad with two young kids. The kids are on roller skates, and Vivian had her camera ready right at the moment when the young girl turns around to face her. And to me, the addition of people, and you'll see later, animals as well, they bring a totally different way of conveying and translating emotions through photography. And that's what is a big thing for me with photography. Here we have Henri CartierBresson, certainly another beautiful, well-known black and white photographer. He lived long enough to know about color, but he was quoted as once saying that he despised color. This image, again, would be wonderful without any of the living things. It's a beautiful image. The graphic context is just gorgeous. The wet sidewalk, the stairs going up on the left-hand side, the implied staircase going down on the right. The light is just gorgeous. He's got a beautiful misty light. But there is no doubt that the two people, and I'm going to stipulate beyond that, it's really the cat that makes this picture, because the addition of the cat, it adds that air of mystery and, in a way, elegance to this picture that I think only black and white images can do. I find it much more difficult to convey that kind of feeling with color photography. Another one of my favorites is Margaret Bourke-White. Something very important with photography is finding your vantage point. And in this case, Margaret found a great vantage point, which is some sort of balcony overlooking this, the floor of the silk mill. The image itself is stunning. I mean, it's a stunning black and white image. The tonality, the shapes, the patterns, the textures, it's wonderful. It'd be wonderful without anybody, without any people in the image. But yet, for me, it's the people. It's the random, scattered nature of the people working at these looms that give this image so much more vulnerability. Because at the time this was taken, you could only think about how many days per week and how many hours per day these folks worked. And it's probably 6 days a week and probably close to 10 hours a day. And when you think of what that must have been like, you know, working at a mill like this for that kind of time frame, it's really quite astounding. And I think when you start reading that into the imagery, it makes the imagery all the more powerful. Leonard Farkas, another wonderful photographer. This is another great example of that, because we have a beautiful contrast here between the rectangular nature of the doors and the light shining through, creating those columns of light. And yet it's the dancer and the shadow and the silhouette that the dancer is creating that's being thrown right into one of those light corridors that makes this image so atmospheric and so emotional. And I think, again, it's just another example of finding the right vantage point, combining it with a great graphic scene, and then potentially adding, whether it be a person or an animal, to the scene to give it that last piece of vulnerability. Dorothy Lang, another one of my favorites. I love this image. A young girl, very humble abode, staring into the fireplace. What is she thinking? Is she thinking, do we have any wood tonight for a fire? Do we have anything to eat tonight? Notice the school books up on top of on the windowsill. So there actually is some informal or formal learning. going on wherever this was taken. But it's what Dorothea wants you to look at is this girl's face in the shadow and her hands holding her face, letting you just wander into the image and just wonder what this young woman is thinking about and is actually kind of wondering about. And here would be a good example, because I don't know what color the walls of this very humble abode are, but whatever color it is, it would be a distraction. In this case, it wouldn't matter at all. There are some cases where just whatever color it might be, it wouldn't aid the image at all. It would just be a distraction. And I think this is a good example of that. And I just love her work because I think she wears her heart, on her sleeves. You can just really feel Dorothy Lang's images. This is another one of my favorites by someone named Leonard Freed. You already know I'm a cat person. I don't know where my cat Nico went wandering off to, but he's somewhere. But this is a wonderful image to me because, again, even without the cats, this would be a wonderful, striking image, whether it's New York or Chicago. The facades are wonderful. The repetitive shapes are great. I love the lamp sconces coming off the wall. But there is no doubt that it's the two cats that make this picture so wonderful. If you're a cat person, you're very familiar with cat body language. And so you know that the cat that's coming from the background into the foreground, it has a very friendly gesture and a very open gait, tail up, I think very curious. And yet it's in total contrast to the cat that's in the foreground that is completely the opposite way. Tail down, extraordinarily nervous, very tense. And what I love about an image like this is you just know that in the next couple of seconds, something is going to happen, between these two animals, and you just don't know what. And the fact that you don't know what, it gives the image so much of its power. Because if you knew the answer, it would take all the mystery and suspense out of it. And I'm glad to hear someone mention Hitchcock earlier while we were just chatting, because people ask me what other people have influenced my work. I'm a big fan of the great black and white film directors like Hitchcock and like Orson Welles and like so many others, because I think they saw the same things that we as photographers see in black and white. I think they see the power of black and white. Hitchcock continued to make many movies in black and white, even though a lot of movie directors had switched over to color, because I think he realized that there was a power, an elegance, a sophistication, a mystery to black and white that you just couldn't really conjure up, with color photography. So here's a great image by a great photographer, Robert Frank. He's very well known for a book called The Americans that came out in the late 40s, early 50s. You can sometimes find a used version that's in decent condition for about $60, $65. His project was basically just to photograph America. And this image was his way of showing the diversity of our country in ethnicity, in age, in all the ways that he could muster up, which makes his book such a great book to have. I don't own one, but if one of these days I will. And what made this image so powerful is that everyone is put into their own picture frames, and what's above them are sort of the psychedelic reflections of the buildings that the streetcar is passing. And this is another example. I don't know what color the streetcar is, whether it's a dark maroon or a dark green, but whatever color it is, it's not what Robert Frank wanted you to look at. He wanted you to look at the way that he framed the faces in the streetcar. And so again, this is where color would really not help this image, at all. Great Chinese photographer, Fan Ho. Number one, he found the vantage point, which you're going to hear a lot. Finding the right vantage point for your imagery is really important. And he found a wonderful vantage point above the street where these people are. He also found an incredibly rich textural graphic scene. I'm not sure what's throwing these shadows on the ground, whether it's a fence or another building, but whatever it is, it's creating a perfect graphic context. And I think he just waited, because patience is another really big, important part of photography. I think he just waited until he had every column filled with an individual person with no connection to each other. So you have no idea what these people are thinking, where they're going, what's on their mind, but you do know that these folks have no relationship to each other at all. And yet they are all connected through the photograph, and they're all connected by being humans, you know, on the planet. And I think that's, again, what makes an image like this so powerful. Another fun part of putting this project together was finding people that I wasn't that familiar with, some newer photographers. I don't remember all their names, which is terrible, and I don't have my index cards out at the moment. This was actually done by a gentleman named bajadearburneck, and I think we've all been to amusement parks and shot these kinds of shots, but I think he really nailed it, because we are talking black and white tonight. So why not be starkly black and white? Because the ride itself, it appears just as a monolith on the right-hand side of the image coming into the center. And the left-hand side of the image is taken up by the people on the ride, but there's no detail in these people at all. You can kind of see some hair flying from some of the girls, you know, on the ride. But other than that, there's absolutely no detail in the people's faces. And the combination of that plus the monolithic quality of this amusement park ride really gives this image a lot of power. This actually was done by the same gentleman. And again, a beautiful graphic context. You know, I think every one of us would be proud of this image without someone sitting on that stairway, because it's really a beautiful graphic, you know, image. But it's the gentleman sitting on the stairs that really makes this image to me. Is he waiting for an office to open? Is he waiting to go on an interview? Maybe he was just fired. Maybe he's meeting a clandestine person for an afternoon, you know, love flirt. You really don't know. And I like photographs that pose questions that you just don't know the answers to, because I think that's what gives a lot of photos tremendous power. This was done by, again, a gentleman, I believe his name was Lesfranco. A lot of us also love abandoned things. Abandoned houses, abandoned cars, abandoned amusement parks. And why do we like abandoned things? Because they tell stories. And on one level, that's what photography is about, is telling stories. And this particular one struck me really more strongly than many others, because it is sitting totally by itself. So there's nothing else. There's no other context to give to this abandoned house. And I like the slow shutter speed because there's some movement in the clouds, which I think adds some textural context to the image. And of course, we're left with those same questions. Who lived here? Why did they move? Under what circumstances? Did they run? Did they have to run quickly for some reason? And you're just left again with those questions, but without any answers. And I love the barrels, the two barrels in the front and the one barrel on the side, because without those three, to give it some context, there's really nothing else around this, this abandoned house. There's nothing else in the background. So it gives you that complete lack of context. This is, I think, one of the most striking self-portraits I've ever seen. All I know is that her name is Elena K. And again, as I said before, we're talking about black and white tonight. So why not use black and white in its pure form? This is a perfect example of that. There's no detail on the right side of her face at all. It's completely in shadows or in dark. And on the right-hand side, you see the detail of her eye, of course, and her eyebrow and her eyelash and a little bit of her nose. But other than that, there's just nothing else to give you any context, in this image. And yet I can stare at this image for 10 minutes looking for the meaning. What is she trying to convey, to me as the viewer in this image? What is she thinking about as she's constructing this self-portrait? And I think if an image holds your viewer, or a viewer's interest for beyond the fleeting 10, 15 seconds that most people give to a visual image, you've accomplished your goal. This was taken again by that same Chinese photographer. And what I thought about this one was, one of the things I mentioned before, but I think I went through it rather quickly, is that I think there's an elegance and a sophistication to black and white that is very difficult to accomplish with color. And I think the photographer in this case, he found this scene beforehand. Again, patience and preparation. I think he found an area where this pavement was wet. And then by just waiting, he got a bicyclist coming through the scene. And by using a slower shutter speed and a little panning of the camera, he created this ultra elegant, sophisticated black and white image of this gentleman just driving through just pedaling through the scene. So these were all a bunch of images that, as you start to look at mine, I think you'll see how and where they sort of fit into the overall pattern. But first, I want to show you this chart. So this chart really explained a lot to me as I did my delving into black and white and why it had such an appeal to me. And these colors and the emotions that we associate with these colors, they are hard baked into us as human beings living in the Western civilization. And I say Western civilization because one of the better questions that I've got once during this presentation was, do I think this would be the same in a different part of the country? Would people still associate those same emotions, with these colors? And my only answer was, I don't know, because I've never lived in another civilization other than ours. But there's no doubt that in my mind, as I looked at this chart, there is no escaping the relationship that we as photographers have between these emotions and these colors. Imagine trying to create an extraordinarily sad image only using yellow tones. It certainly would be possible, but I think it would be extraordinarily difficult. And what I also liked about this particular chart was that it included not only the colors, but it included what we associate with black, gray, and white. And I think if you look at the blacks, the grays, and the white, you could take one of the qualities out of each one of those boxes and conjure up an image of your mind, that would encapsulate all three of those. You could take sophistication from black and strength of character from gray and maybe coolness from the white, and imagine Cary Grant leaning up against a building, in one of his movies. So it's clearer and easier to see how the black, gray, and white emotions carry through. When you get into the colors, it gets a little trickier, but it's really important to know that you make these associations in your brain, whether you want to or not. It's just happening, because that's how sort of we're built and that's how we're put together. So now what I'm going to show you is some of my images, first as a color file and then as a monochrome file. And I'll tell you a little bit about each image. This is the Amtrak station in Baltimore. This is all pre-COVID. When we go out to make art or to take pictures, whatever expression you like to use, there are a few different ways that occurs, right? One is we go out by ourselves, just, because I sometimes wake up and say, there's something I want to try and get done, or, today. And I think taking some pictures is part of that. Or we get together with a group of our friends, maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 people, and we call them rambles. And we go on a ramble. We get into somebody's vehicle and we drive around. We don't know what we're looking for. We're just hoping to come across something wonderful. And the odds of coming back with something wonderful when you're with a group of people, I think is at the lowest level. When you're by yourself, that level goes up quite a bit, because I think you're concentrating a little more on what you're looking for. But there's another way to look at it. And the other way to look at it is, if I'm looking to shoot emotional images and images that have an emotional quality to it, I'm going to look for places where emotions tend to run high. So I find train stations, airports, bus stations, baseball stadiums, photographing, your favorite team, any place where there's a great exchange of emotions going on, you have the potential of capturing that emotion and turning it into a wonderful photograph. And so I don't live very far away from where our Amtrak station is, and I'm there on this one day, and I'm sitting across from this young boy sitting on a bench just by himself, leaning on his suitcase. There's a flood of emotions that I'm getting from just looking at this scene. I'm getting a little bit of loneliness. I'm getting a little bit of abandonment. I'm getting a little bit of maybe adventure. Maybe he's actually about to leave, on some wonderful adventure. So there's lots of possibilities, but I really wanted to, but what's really important always is to distill it down to its simplest process, right? You hear that a lot with photographers, is make sure that it's as simple as it possibly can be. And by converting it to black and white, cleaning it up a little bit, keeping a lot of the architectural details, especially those 2 doors, because those 2 doors to me in this image are very, very important, because they represent so many possibilities. They represent the possibility of someone coming through those doors to meet this young boy. Maybe those are the doors that he's going to be going through as soon as his train comes in. And maybe he's on a journey to visit a relative that he's never met before. There's so many possibilities. And if I would have cropped those doors out, it would have taken that whole sense of mystery and intrigue, out of that particular image. And so, of course, I left them in. We have some beautiful old buildings and libraries in Baltimore. It's an old city, sort of like Cleveland. We have a lot, in common. This is at the Peabody Library, and this is a very well-known spiral staircase in Baltimore, and a lot of us have photographed it. On this particular day, I was there by myself, just walking through the neighborhood that it's at. And I just, poked my head in and said, oh yeah, sure, I'm gonna go shoot the staircase, because one of the things that I'm always hoping for is that someone will actually walk down those stairs. Now there's an elevator now there that'll take you from the 4th floor down to the bottom level. So most people don't use those stairs anymore. And on this particular day, when I was framing up the shot, I heard the telltale clip-clop of someone walking down the stairs. And I said, well, maybe this is my lucky day, because now I have to hope that the person is close enough to the railing so that I can include them in the image. I still don't know at this point if it's a male or a female. And so she rounds the corner. Now I know it's a girl. She is close enough to the railing. And I slowed my shutter speed down just a little bit, because I wanted it to imply just a little bit of motion. So I think I took this at like 1/40th of a second. I looked at this image. I loved it, except I hated the color tonality of the image. It was so overwhelming, that dark green. And I don't even mean in the emotional sense. I just mean in terms of it was overpowering what I really wanted the image to say. And by converting it, I now have definitely focused your eye on her. And the feeling that I got from this was that she was stuck like in a vortex or a maelstrom, or Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And the fact that there's a little bit of movement that she has actually just emphasized that. And so in this case, by just removing that very dark green tonality, I was able to make this much more about her and what she might be feeling and what I'm trying to create as a feeling in the viewer, which I always am thinking in the back of my mind. So here I am back at the Amtrak station again on a different visit, and I come across this man taking a nap on one of the benches. And I'm immediately drawn to this as a potential really great photo. Again, I'm getting a mixture of emotions, loneliness, abandonment, fear, just so many. Is this person homeless and using the station, or is this person just stopping in to use the restroom? Because the restrooms, of course, are public in an Amtrak station. His shoes are untied. He's got a bottle of water in his hand. I loved everything about the image except for the color tonality. I didn't like the tannish tonality of the bench because it leads you to think in a certain way emotionally, which I didn't want you to think. I wanted you really to think about just the person. And the more distracting one was, of course, that green tonality in the back. But I loved all the architectural details. I even loved the telephones and the Amtrak police sign, but it had to be distilled down to its simplest form. And by doing black and white, that's what creates that. Now the lines on the bench are just drawing you into the figure, and his reflection actually gets a little bit magnified now by turning the bench into grayscale instead of keeping it in that gray tonality. So again, it's finding an emotional scene. Sometimes you need to go out and look for them. They don't always just happen. That's lucky when that happens. This is an interesting example too. I'm in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Again, I grew up in New York, so it is my hometown. And I'm traversing between one gallery and another. And I take a quick look to my left, and what do I see? Well, in the simplest answer, well, you saw two water fountains. Yes, but that's not what I saw. Even right from the start, I saw this as a potential abstract black and white image because I saw two figures basically that were wearing these long skirts, and I saw the reflection of the basins being thrown on the wall as some sort of almost otherworldly situation. But again, to simplify and to emphasize and to really translate to the viewer what I'm trying to translate, converting it to black and white was the obvious answer, because by doing that, I was able to darken down the skirts that I tend to call them the skirts, and I was able to play up those wonderful wonderful reflections that are coming from the basins. And if you wanted to spend a little time and delve into abstract photography, I think you should definitely stick with black and white. I think black and white lends itself to abstract photography really well, because then you are dealing with the shapes and the textures and the lines. And when you're dealing with color photography and adding color, I think it makes doing successful abstract photography even trickier. And I'm already not great at abstract photography. I think it's something that I'd really like to get better at. Sometimes it's just a feeling of awe that we're trying to recreate. And this was when I was living up in Southern York County, Pennsylvania. This was a big thunderstorm that was brewing. I really wanted this to be more about just the clouds, although I played with the foreground, but nothing I did with the foreground really ever worked for me. And so basically I just took those distracting colors, out of the foreground and just left it to be all about the impending storm. And within about 5 minutes, I was in my car with all the windows up, and, it took about 20 minutes for this storm to sort of just pass over, where I was. So sometimes you're just trying to recreate that feeling. Now, a question that I get a lot, two questions that I get a lot that come at the same time is, do I shoot in black and white? And do I think in black and white? So I'm going to answer the first one first. No, I don't shoot in black and white. Even though our cameras have the abilities to shoot in monochrome, the algorithms that the camera engineers have built into your cameras, they're not nearly as powerful as the algorithms that the engineers at Adobe and at Nik have built into their software programs. So I know that there are some people that say they shoot one frame in black and white to give them an example of what the image might look like. I think that's a good idea. I don't personally do that, but I have no problem with that. But to answer the second question, I definitely think in black and white, because when I looked at this image through my viewfinder, I really didn't like the color cast that the day had. The color balance was a very weird color balance, but I loved the potential that the shot had, because I loved it. That's no shack. That's like a mansion, sitting by itself. I loved the power lines off to the left, and I really loved the sky. It had tremendous potential. And so by just, again, taking it into one of the better programs, I was able to turn that first image into this, which I just think is far more powerful and far more storytelling than the first one. And it also got rid of that kind of odd, color palette, which I just found to be very disturbing. Timelessness. By the way, I take one or two quick breaks so that we don't have to wait until the very end for all the questions. So in another few minutes, I'm going to take my first break, and people can ask me if they have any questions or throw any comments out. One of the things we haven't talked about is the quality of timelessness and black and white. There is a quality of timelessness that we associate with black and white. I think the obvious reason is because it's what was there, meaning that that's the medium that was available to people as they started to become photographers. But it goes a little deeper than that, I think, because when I saw this image, the combination of the dress that she was wearing, which to me could have come out of Appalachia in the 1930s or 40s, her haircut, the expression on her face, and even the stuff that's on the patio that I really like, especially those two stone raccoons off to the right. This image is very, very difficult to actually put a timestamp on. Yeah, you could figure out when approximately this image was taken. That's a plastic flower pot. So right there, that's a giveaway right there. If that was a ceramic flower pot, that would even be a little more difficult. But by converting it to black and white, I think I keep all the good qualities of the image, which is really all about her. It's all about her face, her expression. And again, it's one of those images that leaves you thinking, what in the heck is this girl thinking? Because the expression that she has on her face is definitely one of the most haunting, expressions that I've ever been able to capture, with my camera. But by turning it into black and white, I definitely reinforced the timelessness, and I also reinforced the black and white nature of those two stone raccoons off to the right, which I totally fell in love with. So let's just take a quick break now so I can catch my breath. And if anyone has any questions or anything that they want to throw out, this would be your first opportunity. Well, nobody.
The picture that you have here, little girl, that left hand, is that a stone?
Right down here.
Yeah.
No, she's holding on to I think that's an edge of like a toy broom.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought maybe that you were getting in firing range there. of
No,
that
no, no,
stone.
no, no. And I don't have time to tell you the whole story as to how this image occurred, but there is a whole story behind this
Mhm.
image that's
Hey.
interesting.
Hey, Lewis, do you print a lot? Do you look at the final vision as your print or
Boy, that's a great,
digitally?
yeah, that's a great question. I print as often as I can because I really love printing, and I think the art of printing is an art. I think it's a completely different art from photography. I haven't been printing as much because of COVID, because we haven't been having very many, we haven't had any print competitions. So I haven't been doing nearly as much as I'd like to do. But your other question is a better question. And can you what was that last question you asked me?
Do you see the print as your kind of final
Right.
expression of what you're trying to do versus the digital?
That's a wonderful question, and one that I wouldn't really be able to 100% answer yet, because I'd have to actually give that a little more thought. There have been times when I would absolutely answer that question yes, because of the nature of the image I was working on, or the purpose that the image was being used for, whether it was being displayed or sold or whatever. So I don't think it always has to be, you know, the final end product the way that it was to Ansel and to a lot of the other, you know, famous photographers. But I think it's not a bad attitude to have toward printing, because it makes you want it makes you want to raise the level of your printing to be as higher quality as possible. And I think that's always a worthy goal. So that's how I'd answer that question. But it's a great question. Anything else, or shall we press on? Okay, we will press on. So I live in Baltimore. I'm only about an hour away from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is one of the big areas of the Amish. They live all over the United States, but there's a concentration of them in Pennsylvania. And there are events in the spring that are called mud sales. And they're called mud sales because they take place in fields that usually are muddy from the snow that hasn't completely melted. And the reason why we're standing in a field at a mud sale is because the Amish are selling and auctioning things, anything you can think of, from tools to quilts to actual buggies, you know, and they're doing it to raise money for their volunteer fire department. So this is a rare opportunity for Amish people, and they call us the English. This is a rare opportunity where Amish and English people mix at a public event. And the fact that it's a public event makes photography feasible. Now, I don't want to get into a long conversation, because I've had many with people that would say, doesn't matter to me that it's a public event. If they don't want their picture taken, you shouldn't take their picture. I really don't want to have that debate right now. It is an opportunity to get pictures of Amish, and it's a great opportunity to get portraits like this one of this young boy. I'm not a Gary Winogrand style, so I don't jump right up into your face with a 10mm lens. I'm usually, you know, about a decent distance away with, you know, somewhere between an 80 and a 140, you know, lens. But there's no doubt that I don't just skulk and sneak pictures in. I make eye contact with my subject and then create the image. And this young boy had just, again, such an open and honest expression on his face that I loved. But the hat was a distraction. Even though it's not modern, there's something about the yellow orange nature of the hat and how close that is to your face color, that it was drawing attention away from what I wanted people to look at, and that is this. I just want viewers to look at the face, the eyes, you know, the cut of the hair. The color of the hat is really totally unimportant. And the Amish dressed very simply to begin with. So the rest of his outfit was very simple already. So it really just worked. It was just the color of the hat that just threw me off. And so I just, you know, just converted it to black and white. New York City again. You know, my wife and I are both big Art Deco fans. And so therefore the Chrysler Building is one of our favorite buildings in the world because it's an Art Deco masterpiece. And we found ourselves at a rooftop bar a couple of winters ago. And I found myself with great difficulty figuring out a way to get my tripod so that my center post was above the top of the security fence, because all these rooftop bars have big fences because they don't want people drinking and falling off of rooftops. And I was able to finagle my way to get, you know, this shot. And I liked it. And it definitely features the Chrysler Building. But when I first took a look at the color file, the colors of the other buildings, one is complete, the one on the left, and the one on the right is actually still under construction. They really, once again, not only are they drawing your attention away from what I want you to look at, but they're adding an emotive quality. That yellow adds that warm, sunny kind of feeling, and it's a night shot. So to me, that just didn't really work. And again, I'm thinking back to my old movie days, you know, where the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, you know, were definitely shot in black and white. And so this became this. I just worked pretty diligently on converting this to a black and white file. I really feel that right now you first see the Chrysler Building and then you see the two buildings that are framing it. Whereas the other one, I think it all gets sort of mishmashed together. And by converting it, and also you can tell I cropped a little bit and reframed it, I was able to make this a much more logical and it transmits more of a feeling now that once I converted it to a black and white. And I think the details in the other buildings are really interesting, but they really pale in comparison to the details of the Chrysler Building, at least to me, because to me, the Chrysler Building is just, you know, just one of the greatest buildings that I know. So here's an interesting example about color and emotion. So, you know, cemeteries are kind of odd, aren't they? Because that's where we lay our deceased to rest for the rest of their days. And yet cemeteries are completely covered in grass. So it's an interesting contrast between where we have laid our relatives and friends for eternity, with the feeling you get from green, which is the feeling of life and of nurture. So right away, that's an odd contrast. And I kind of like it, but it wasn't what I was trying to do on this particular day. On this particular day, I was really taken by the shapes of some of the stones, and I was really taken by the shape of that tree in the background. And I was trying to find a composition that sort of combined the two. Then I was going to turn it into grayscale and completely remove the green as an element from the image. Because now what I believe we're looking at is just the message that the image is now saying, which is, this is a cemetery. This is where people have been laid to rest. Here are some interesting stones with some interesting writing, which you could probably make out if you had a magnifying glass. But yet I still got that beautiful tree and those really nice clouds in the background. So, you know, it's a minor thing, just taking the green out, but in terms of its impact on the image, I think it has a tremendous impact. You may like the other one better. That's what's so nice about photography. Everybody's got their, you know, their opinions. Another thing that I started doing when COVID hit was I went back to my macro days. I knew that we weren't going to be traveling very far anymore for a while. So one of the things I thought about was I could always do macro work, you know, in a home studio. We have nice windows that get some nice exposure. And so I thought about, you know, what I used to do, because I hadn't shot macro in a long, long time. So I went out and I bought some Calla Lilies, which to me are about the most elegant and sophisticated flower that I know. I'm in love with Calla Lilies. Now, as soon as I looked at these images through my viewfinder, I knew that this was going to turn into a black and white project, because this image right now that you're looking at of the Calla Lily, it's really not giving me, at least, the feeling of elegance and sophistication that I was trying to transmit with these beautiful, sophisticated flowers. And yet, by converting it to black and white and cleaning it up and, you know, taking out some rough edges and whatever, now I'm getting more to that feeling that I was going for, which was this very 1930s nightclub kind of, you know, swanky black and white feel. And this one does it for me, whereas the one in color just wasn't doing it for me. So I played with some more in as sharp as possible, meaning that here's another one where I was using high apertures and focus stacking to try and get as much of the Calla Lily, you know, in focus as possible. So, and that was fun. But as I worked on them, I also realized that there was another opportunity here. And the other opportunity was to think of these as abstract images instead of perfectly fine art images. And so then I really started having fun, because I started playing with Calla Lilies as abstract objects. So here I'm just starting to play with selective focus. I'm purposely throwing the back end of the Calla Lily completely out of focus, and I'm playing more with how the background merges with the edges, you know, of the flower, and it sort of like almost becomes one, you know, the flower becomes the background. And so I had a lot of fun working with those as well. And here's another example where I'm purposely leaving the center part, what I call the veins, I know that's not the right word, in focus, but I'm purposely leaving all of the edges as blurred out, you know, as possible. And I think I had as much fun doing the abstracts as I did doing the ones that were tack sharp. All right, so I'm going to quickly show you some images and just tell you quick stories and give you a little more insight into how I do things, and then we'll hop in to do some conversions, and that's probably as far as we'll be able to get to tonight. I said earlier tonight that photography requires patience. This scene, think of that scene with the two cats that I showed you earlier on the street in Manhattan or Chicago, where one cat was approaching the other. Here's a scene that I found, but without the person. I found the walkway. I love the fences on either side. I love the curved lampposts on the left. I love those, like, I call them my like scary Alfred Hitchcock trees coming in on the right. That's a deserted power plant in the background. That's an old Con Edison power plant I think it's since been just totally demolished. But what I lacked was a person. It really cried out for a person. And I just knew that if I was patient, I was in Manhattan after all, someone would come up those stairs that you can see on the left and would walk toward me, because there isn't any way to walk the other way. And sure enough, within about 10, 12 minutes, someone came up the stairs, and lucky for me, he was wearing all dark clothing, which is exactly what I was hoping for. And I started shooting him a few steps behind where he is now, and I kept shooting him until he's a few steps beyond where he is. And then when I looked at the images later, I just picked the one that came out the best. So sometimes patience is required, because I think in this image, the person just adds a tremendous ambiguity and a tremendous emotional feel to the image that the image otherwise would just be lacking. So patience, very important. Patience and vantage points. Here I am back at the Amtrak station again, but on this particular day, I went looking for shadows and silhouettes. That was my goal. So I get to the station, I find a bench to sit on across from one of those doors that you can see in the background that are allowing in that curtain of light. And I just wait for the action to happen, because I know if I'm going to sit there for, let's say, an hour, X amount of people are going to cross through that column of light. But I needed one by he or herself. You know, everything has to still fall together. And in this case, it did, because I got within 10 minutes this woman with very nice clothing and fancy boots and walked through the corridor of light. I got the shot, meaning that I got her foot in the air. You know, you can see her shadow on the column of light. She's pulling a suitcase. You can't see her face. So it adds all of that stuff that I was talking about before. You know, it adds the ambiguity, the mystery, the atmosphere. Where is she going? Where is she coming from? Is she meeting someone? You know, is there something going on that someone should know about? And that's how pictures tell stories. But you have to be able to be in the right place at the right time. And that does require sometimes being at the right vantage point, and also just being there and having some patience, because things sometimes just don't happen right away. Now, I also think black and white is wonderful for weather. I think for snow, for mist, for fog, rain, I think it's just perfect. So the minute any kind of bad weather occurs, I immediately think black and white. So this is just, you know, I used to live in farm country before I moved to Baltimore proper. And so I know where these farms are up in where I used to live, about 40 minutes from Baltimore. And so you know, when it snows, I immediately think of just driving up 83 North and getting off at exit 1 and just driving through farm country. And I'm looking for shots like this. I'm looking for graphic contact shots where there's just very little detail in the fences, but I just love the way the fences cross in the middle. And I love the contrast between the fences and the snow and the fallow corn in the background. Similar kind of shot. I was able to back up a little further and use a wider angle lens. So I was able to capture this wooden, beautiful curved wooden fence. And I was still able to get that nice tree line behind. And if you look very carefully, and I didn't notice this until I looked at it on my computer, but there's a bird flying over the trees right on the right-hand side, like maybe 1/4 from the edge. There's a bird flying right over one of the trees, which I just think is kind of cool. And I also think it's kind of cool when you find something after the fact that you weren't even aware of, you know, when you made the shot. So this is the same farm where those other fences are, but this is the other side of the farm. This is where they keep the horses. And on this particular day, and this was taken this year, we actually got some snow this year. I concentrated more on the horses this time. And I had the shot composed, but it was too right heavy, because you see that one horse on the left by itself? Imagine that horse not being in the picture and looking at the viewfinder. It was way too right heavy. You know, it needed 1 or 2 horses on the left-hand side to balance out the image. Because another thing that's very important in imagery is rhythm. And we're not going to have time to talk about that tonight, but rhythm, you know, photographs have beats, almost like music has beats. And so that horse was my missing beat. And so I just had to wait, because it just took 5 or 10 minutes of time. And sure enough, he strolls in from the left-hand side and puts his head down to dig out some grass from underneath the snow, and boom, I got my shot. And now I'm looking at a much more balanced photograph. This tree is like a very good friend of mine. I have shot this tree for over 15 years. I know exactly where this tree is. I know one of these times I'm going to go back and it's going to be gone. It'll be knocked down by a storm, or a farmer will sell the land to a developer. But until that happens, I'm going to continue my relationship with this tree. And at times this makes me sound a little wacky, and it brings me back to my, my hippie days. But, I consider this tree to be like an intimate friend of mine. When I go visit this tree to shoot the tree, to photograph the tree, it's like visiting someone that I haven't seen for a long time, because that's how intimately familiar I've become with all of its little nuances. And that's why when I'm teaching, in the field, and when I do workshops, I really stress that people should continually go back to places that they know and continue to shoot them and to continue to get to know them, because that's how you build up that emotional connection to your subject matter. And without that emotional connection to your subject matter, your viewer is not going to feel that emotional connection either. And if your viewer doesn't feel some kind of emotional connection, 10 seconds, they're on to the next image. What keeps people viewing an image is they feel that something is there. It's a visceral feeling that you're trying to impart. And that's why going back to the same place many, many times is not a bad thing, because you get to know the area very well. Monochromal things are great. This is an off-white barn door. This one is closed. Notice the latch is closed. And the only darker figures in this image are the nail studs and a little bit of the dark around the door handle. And on the other hand, this one's sort of almost exactly the opposite. This was a muddy brown barn with a off-white door, but I didn't like the muddy brown tone at all, but I knew the muddy brown would convert to a charcoal kind of gray. And by doing that, I think I came up with a much more effective, monochromatic image of this barn door. And this was taken this year too. This again, now we're just getting into some simple constructive images now. This is me just using the fallow cornfields to draw you into the farm scene. All the trees in the background have ice on them because after it snowed, there was an ice storm. And what looks like a chimney on the right with some smoke is actually a grain silo, and that's the wind blowing the snow off the top of it. So even though it looks a little bit like a smokestack of some kind, that's not, what it is at all. And notice in the buildings, all of the similar shapes, all of the squares and all the rectangles, they just mirror, each other. And here's another one from this year where I was just trying to create a multi-layered black and white winter landscape. There's hardly any color in this shot to begin with. And so it right away became, how am I going to construct this, as a black and white landscape, photograph? Because I think, again, I think snow really lends itself to that kind of landscape. This was actually one that I added at the end. Most of the ones that you've seen so far were converted using Lightroom. This one, it was converted using Silver Efex Pro. And I think the more I get to know it, I think the more I'm going to probably use Silver Efex Pro instead of Lightroom. It really is a much more powerful program. It's a program, though, that I need to spend some time with because I need to learn more about it. But it's an amazingly powerful black and white conversion tool. And I think it's got a lot more guts behind it, under the engine, so to speak, than Adobe's Lightroom does. So, but that's why I threw this one in, because it was done, I converted this using a different engine. So here's the grayscale, Ansel Adams. I'm sure all of you or most of you are familiar with this. I like this one because it not only showed the different tones, but it actually tells you what items fit into the tonal chart. So, medium dark gray, dark foliage, or landscape shadows. It actually gives you specific, examples. He used this more, and actually Fred Archer helped him develop this, and Fred Archer's name always gets left out. This was someone that, to the gentleman that asked that question about printing, this is much more relative to that question, because this was used much more as a printing tool than a capture the image in the field tool. But why I included it was because I wanted you to look at this one and then immediately look at this one. And this one is showing you how different colors reflect their, and you can use the terms luminosity or tonality or brightness. When you're talking about black and white, you're almost talking about the same thing. And I was really interested to find, when I looked at this chart, that hot violet all the way on the right was actually turning into a lighter toned gray than the yellow two colors from the left. So I just found it kind of interesting that different colors obviously emit different wavelengths when light is reflected off of them. So that's interesting because, for instance, with an image like this, one might think that because it's kind of colorful, that it would convert nicely to a black and white. And so just to show you, I'll just do this. And of course, without me amping up some of the color channels and playing with contrast and a lot of other things, this is a very flat looking image, even though the color version is not flat at all. Actually, I like some of the colors, you know, of the row homes. And an even more glaring example was this one right here. This one was some, you know, begonias or petunias on my back patio last summer. And I took a look at the color file and I said, boy, this is really going to make a great black and white, you know, image. And boy, was I wrong, because again, by just doing the simple conversion, look how flat that is. There's hardly any tonality difference between those colors, which in this case are yellows, pinks, and greens. But yet on a luminosity level, they're all extraordinarily similar. So unless I went in and adjusted each color channel differently, it would be hard to really come up with a contrasty image. So just an example. Okay, now let's talk about post-processing. How are we doing on time? 8:30. Okay, this is good. I'll be probably done in about 15 minutes. Okay. Let me first say about post-processing that it should be a means to an end. And what do I mean by that? I know that many of us, and I'm including myself, have taken an image that we're not 100% sold on. There are certain aspects about it that we like. There are certain aspects about it that we don't like, but we're sure that if we take it into a software program and play with it for a half hour, we're going to turn it into like a masterpiece. Well, I think you all know, sitting in the audience out there, that just ain't the way it happens. In most cases, if you have an image that you're not sold on to start with, you're not going to convert it to a masterpiece using software. So when I say it should be a means to an end, I think we as photographers should have a goal post in mind when we start to post-process our images. It gives us a clearer path as to what we're trying to actually create. And it also assures us, or should assure us, that the image that we're starting to work on is worth the time and the effort that we're about to put into it. Because if you're not sold on that, you should probably spend some more time thinking about how much effort do you want to put into it. Now, what I'll also say is, when I'm doing a black and white conversion on a serious level, and that would be to prepare for a print or to maybe enter it into a digital competition or to make a print that I'm selling to someone, I probably would go back to that same image 4 or 5 times. I don't just do it on one shot because there's always something that I miss. And I would normally spend maybe 15 minutes each time I'd go back. So that means that I would say on average, I spend maybe an hour to an hour and a half on a really carefully done conversion from color to black and white. My point is, I don't have the time to do that in a program like this, in a presentation like this. So what I'm going to quickly show you, though, are some, I don't know, some tricks or some, not tricks, but just some broader strokes, which will give you an idea into how I think about post-processing. So here's an Amish girl from one of those mud sales, although one of my friends was convinced that she was a Russian emigre from her expression. And I liked the image. I thought the expression had that haunting kind of quality about it. But what I didn't like was this pink color. I just thought the pink gave it a modern look that I don't think went with the overall image that I was trying to portray. So I converted it to black and white. And when you convert to black and white, we're going to just do Lightroom tonight. I'm going to do a webinar probably at some point on Silver Efex. You still have control over all of your color channels, right? So you can still adjust all these different colors. But the thing I want to point out is you also have up in this upper left-hand corner a tool. You can open up your tool just by clicking on it, and then bringing it into the image and clicking where you want to affect the change. And if you move your cursor up, it brightens everything that's in that tonality. And if you lower it, it lowers everything that's in that tonality. And no, in this case, it is all magenta, but in some cases, it's a mixture of colors. And all I really wanted to do in this case was make that scarf really white, to emphasize the black and white. And then every time you're done using this tool, you then have to close it out. So you have to click on it again. Now, again, I could do the same exact thing, click on that tool. Well, actually, before I click on the tool, let me double click on that. I could click on the tool and I could take it to her skin features. And I could just brighten up her skin a little bit because she was under like really deep shadow. So, and you can do this with adjustment brushes or with styluses. So that's why these things take so much time, is because you really need to be very, very careful when you're doing these kinds of conversions. Sometimes it's fun just to take something that everyone is so used to seeing in color, sunflowers, and seeing what you can do with it as a black and white. So again, I'll just quickly convert to black and white. I know that I have control over the color channels. I'm going to zero them all out. Now, right away, I'm going to take my blue slider and darken the sky. I'm going to take the yellow and the orange, and I'm going to really give a glow to that first sunflower that's right in front. And then I'm going to take green, which is all the foliage, and I can either make it a little darker or I can make it a little lighter. And in this case, I'll leave it a little lighter. And so I went from there to there with just a couple of quick, keystrokes. The other thing that I would end up doing is I would take my adjustment brush and I would take that shadow out. Now, interestingly enough, when this image came up as a digital competition, the judge automatically scored it really high. He said, I have never seen a picture of sunflowers done in black and white. And so sometimes just by doing something a little different, you actually make yourself a little more, known, so to speak. Okay, let's take one or two more. Let's do, okay. So another funny thing that not funny, but another interesting thing that I've done recently is, as I said, if you remember from a while ago, I said I was a color slide photographer. And the color slide film that I shot exclusively was Fuji Velvia, because their color translation was just amazing. So this was a color slide. It started out life as a color slide. I used to make, not I, but a lab used to make copies of this for me that I used to sell at art shows. And this was always a really popular image. But I really wanted to see, first of all, how these Fuji Velvia slides converted to black and white. That was really one of my goals. So what I did was, first of all, if you're going to do anything major like cropping, do that before you start to do anything else. So I want to crop a little from the bottom. I want to crop a little bit from the side. I don't want to cut another tree. That's about it. And then I converted it to black and white. Now, the thing with Adobe is, if you notice, hang on a second, how did that happen? Adobe has its own set of presets. Here's all their black and white presets. The reason why Nick has it so above Adobe is because Nick now must be up to about 60 presets. And I think that's maybe a little too many, but it's certainly more than Adobe offers you. And when I say that you should have a game plan or a goalpost, when I looked at this and thought about a black and white, I wanted to make sure that sky stayed nice and dark, but I wanted to make sure those trees, those birch trees, stayed nice and bright. And so what you do is with Adobe, you can just mouse over these presets until you find the one that actually is giving you the goal that you're looking for. And I think I just hit it. And you can see how some of them really just don't work at all. Like that one's just too dark and that one's way too bright. Let's pick this one just for today. So I'd pick that one, that's blue filter, and I would then click close. And remember that I still have control over all the color channels. So I can go down and I can make that blue sky even a little stormier. I don't want to get rid of that ray of sun though, that's appearing in between the trees and I can bring out the yellow and the greens of the foliage and make them glowy. And I really want these three aspens in the front to really pop. And so what I did in this case, and I really should do this with a stylus, but I opened up my adjustment brush and I double-clicked effect, which zeroes everything out, and I opened up exposure a little bit. And then I literally just started painting. Some extra exposure onto these beautiful aspen trees. And you can see the masking has gotten better, but you should still use a stylus if you really want to be careful. But there you go. And when I printed this, it just popped right off the printer page. The only other thing I did before I printed it is I opened up the shadows on these evergreens that are in between the trees. So I just very carefully with the stylus, I went through each one of those darker evergreens and I just brought out the exposure a little bit because they were too dark. So, all right. And that should be enough for tonight because yes, it's about 8:45. So that leaves us some time for people. If you have any questions or comments, you are going to get a survey from someone at your club along with a Word document that's going to recap what we did tonight. And the survey is only 5 or 6 quick questions. It's anonymous. It's just a way for me as a presenter to get feedback on how people are reacting to my presentations. And they are important because I actually do make changes to some of my presentations based on the feedback that I get. But I want to really first thank you for your time and for your attention. You've been great, and please feel free now to, I'm going to stop share and we can continue this conversation in a more informal way.
It was wonderful, Louis. Thank you so much. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody that I thought it was very informative.
Okay,
I'll let you guys ask questions now.
okay. And when you say you found it informative, what were there certain parts of it that you enjoyed more? Then this is just me being curious.
I think I just learned a lot more about black and white and how to look at it.
Good, great.
I'm not a black and white person. If you look at my website, it is full of color.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay.
I'm just now starting to think about black and white, and
Okay.
Cole Thompson made me start thinking about it.
Well, he'll make you think about it even more. He's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you really gave some good explanations. So I'll shut up now and.
Thank you.
You see me?
No, I was just going to say, I agree with Roberta Lewis, but I mean, I love black and white personally, and I really gravitate towards that a lot. But I really liked how you kind of showed people exactly the juxtaposition of how
One
it is
person at a time,
colored,
please.
but also how it changes into the black and white and exactly kind of what you're looking at, and
Okay.
how it brings out the shapes, the lines, the mood. I think mood is one of the things I love so much about black and white that you can really capture. I mean, some
Absolutely.
of those landscapes of yours with the fences, the tree, the different things I mean, I loved all of your work, but those were just so stunning
Thank
in how they showed that. So I really enjoyed that. And I liked you also kind of talking a little bit about the software that you use. I've used Nix some. I'm not an expert in it at all, but I'm learning a lot about it, like you said that you were, and but just showing how you kind of were able to bring out a lot. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, great, great. Well, I'm glad people really enjoyed it, and I enjoy it. So hopefully my enthusiasm is catching.
I do have a question. I'm
Sure.
sorry, my microphone, I cannot figure out how to get my video to work. I'm Tanya. You mentioned that you were going to be doing a webinar on Silver Efex Pro. So where would we be able to catch up with you on that?
Okay, so you will catch up with me in reference to that through your club, because what I'm doing when I make contact with the club to give a presentation, all of those clubs are on a list, you know, with the contact people or person. And when I'm going to do something that I think will be of interest to anyone that belongs to any of those clubs, I let that contact person know. And I just ask them to spread the word, because I don't really have any other way of getting the word out to photographers across the country. So I think I'm still I think I'm still a good 4 or 5 months out from putting that out, because that's how much I feel I need to learn. If you're going to put out a webinar, you better be really darn good at what you're showing. So I'm patient in that I want to make sure that I really do know what I'm talking about before I go out into the world to present something. But it's something that I've been asked to do, so it's something that I definitely will do.
Louis,
Thank
through
you.
your website, do you have where somebody can sign up for an email list or something like that as well? If they went to your website?
Well, I have a contact. You can
Contact list?
use the contact page and just send me a little note and say, please add me to your email list. I'll be happy to.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, I don't. To be quite candid, because I belong to a camera club like you guys, I don't ask the contact people that I first made contact with for a list of all of the camera of their members and their email addresses, because I think that is definitely overstepping privacy.
I agree.
So there's no way I can get at that unless someone like Roberta or Donna, you know, if you get something from me, they then have to pass it along.
Great.
So,
Great.
Do you still
Okay.
shoot color? Are you exclusively doing monochromes, or do
No.
you still shoot a fair amount of color?
I still shoot a fair amount of color.
Okay.
Yep. Someone asked me one night too, during one of these or something similar, you know, what kind of stuff would you show in color? And I said, well, if you don't mind my digressing, and everybody in the group, there was only like 10 people. They said, no, that'd be great. I showed them pictures of the Caribbean Festival in Baltimore. I showed them pictures of the Latino Fest in Baltimore. I mean, I showed them pictures of events for the most part that were so full of color that I wouldn't have for a second thought of converting them to black and white. So yeah, you know, there are some things that I still love to photograph that are absolutely meant to be photographed in color.
It seems like color either adds to a photograph or detracts from it. And that's what I always try to figure out. Is it, am I adding to what I have, or gee, there's a lot of red in it and that distracts from what I'm trying to do. So, and then you look for a monochrome conversion, but that's what I always ask myself. Is it going to add to it or detract?
Right, right. Okay. All right, folks. Well, everybody stay well. Get through this crazy time. Hopefully our photographic paths will cross again in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Again, Louis, and make sure that you send me your address so we can send you a check.
Who was that? You just said that, Donna?
No, Roberta.
Roberta. Oh, okay, sure. I'll send that out to you today or tomorrow.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Louis.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, everybody, good night, everybody.
Donna.
So good to see everyone.
Good night, John Boy.
See you next week.
Next week.
All right. Yeah, next week already. All right, guys.
Midnight is the deadline.
Tonight, midnight, right?
Tonight at midnight is the deadline, yes.
Okay. All right, guys. Good night, everybody.
Good night.